caught the international health bug when, as a fourth-year Harvard medical student, I went down to Guatemala in an area that had no physicians and used American and Guatemalan medical students to serve as the doctors. One day, Kame and I headed out on house visits and were flagged down by a man stating that his uncle's foot was infected, and he asked if we would go see him. We said of course, and he jumped in the car, and we drove about an hour further into the mountains when the man said, "Stop." We were in the middle of a ravine with a really pretty stream passing by and absolutely no signs of human life. The man took off up the mountain, and Kame and I sat there for about 20 minutes, and then he came tearing back down, carrying his uncle in his arms, with at least 50 people in tow who had heard that there were doctors, or almost doctors, in town, and these people were looking for medical care. So Kame and I, with nothing more than a stethoscope, we had a couple of bandages, 3 antibiotics, and some antiseptic spray, set up clinic in the car and cared for 50 people who lived about 2 hours from the nearest clinic. And I guess that's what I love about international health. You have to be creative and flexible and be able to use limited resources to help people. And by the way, that man who stopped us and flagged the car down insisted that he repay us and took us all the way up the mountain to his parents' shop. And I sat there in the shop on this really cool bench that was actually made out of tree stumps and looked out on the valley and drank my payment, which was the best orange crush I have ever had. So I sat there and watched this man die. Our American system is falling apart, and we know that, and it needs a lot of help. But I was sitting in a hospital in India that had all the resources available to treat this man, and they let him die. At least in this country, if you show up in my emergency department, by law, I must treat you. And that's the way it needs to be. One thing about going and working internationally is that it really makes me appreciate what we have here. My best experiences abroad have always been when I have been working as a doctor. So now when I take my vacations, I like to mix it with medical volunteerism. I recently went to visit my friend who was studying at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon, and she was able to set me up with some volunteer opportunities in Palestinian refugee camps. And I remember the day before I went in to volunteer, I was really nervous and I didn't know what to expect. And I soon found that all of my preconceived notions were wrong. First, I didn't realize that there are both Christian and Muslim Palestinians. And my first volunteer opportunity was in a mostly Christian camp, and my second was in a camp that was all Muslim. In addition, I went over to Lebanon thinking that I'd be treating diarrhea and infectious diseases, and that's what I was prepared for. But in fact, Lebanon is a country of first world health problems, and all of my patients had hypertension and diabetes and cancer. And finally, I actually thought they were going to give me a hard time for being American. But I was welcomed with open arms and lots of delicious food and even a couple of marriage proposals. And the Palestinians just kept asking me, "Why are you here on your vacation? Why are you spending your time with us?" And all I can say is that I find it much more educational and interesting to go be a doctor abroad than to pass by a culture on a tour bus. Hi, I'm Suzie Miller, and I'm an emergency physician. I went to medical school because I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, as most of my medical experience had stemmed from athletics. But when I got to medical school, my first orthopedic surgery was cutting off a woman's leg, and I found it to be a lot like Civil War medicine. I soon realized that I'd rather marry an orthopedic surgeon than become one. So when the time came for me to pick my specialty, I struggled a little bit because I liked everything. I was looking for something fast-paced, people-oriented, that had lots of tough decisions. I also wanted something that was flexible and hands-on and would give me the skills that I could take anywhere in the world. So I chose emergency medicine, and here I am in the ER, and I love it.